Howdy guys, I'm Aiden and welcome back to the Archive channel. You're watching part 2 in a series where I work on a video for 1 week and document the entire process. The last video, I ended up taking notes on my gameplay footage as well as watched a previous video I did to hopefully gain inspiration for the new one. In this episode, I'm going to be working on my script as well as doing some asset gathering. That's what we're doing. These were the pieces of paper from the first video that we wrote a bunch of notes on. The video we're working on is how to beat Sonic R, because I think the game's cool and more people should try it out. I think we'll take these notes and make just sort of a brief outline. In the last video, I wanted 3 sections. So section 1, controls and characters. Section 2, the ideal route. And then I'll save the backside of the page for section 3. We'll call that track advice. And I might not have everything for this section just written in the notes because a lot of it is coin dependent. But until I do a little bit more asset gathering, I'm not going to know exactly what we need for that. So now I just look through my bullet points, sort of match them to each of these 3 sections. So sort of the strat. It's hard for people to grasp the movement, but I said in the video, think of Sonic as like a car, right? He's always going, like fairly quickly, fairly fast. I think my new analogy is going to be better, is to think of Sonic R like a pinball. If the ball is going at a fast speed and hits a wall, it doesn't stop dead in its tracks. It bounces off. And that's kind of how Sonic R controls, right? Walls are not like a momentum killer. The only thing that's going to slow you down is you actually slowing down, or the water. So I'm kind of pivoting a little bit to thinking of Sonic R a little bit more like you're a pinball and you're bouncing around the tracks. So I'm going to pull up Audacity on another monitor, kind of get some early drafts here. And the first couple are going to be bad. I'm just letting you know up front. We'll figure it out as we do it, right? Testing. 1 2 1 2, testing 1 2 1 2. Just making sure my mic works. Alrighty. And we're just going to string sort of all the bullet points together, essentially. So as long as I mention everything here in a pretty concise order and flow, that means we did a pretty good job. The first question that might come to your mind is, which version are we using? While you could use this advice to play on the original Saturn, I'm assuming most of you don't own that, so I'm using the PC version with a couple of mods. None that change the gameplay. In fact, I strongly advise not doing that. These mods just sort of let the game look better and run in widescreen, which I happen to prefer. The next big roadblock is undoubtedly the controls. People get stumped and don't understand quite how Sonic moves, so here is how I would map my controls to any controller, really. All right, so for starters, your bottom button should be set to action. The leftmost button should be set to accelerate, left bumper to L brake, right bumper to right brake, and then you steer with the sticks. Don't worry about the camera button. All this does is slightly zoom out, and you can set pause to whatever you want. You will be tempted to put accelerate on the sticks themselves. This is not worth it. You go fast enough as is. In fact, we won't even be using the accelerate button for most of this. So I'd advise just making sure that your action button is set appropriately and the L brake and right brake are on the bumpers, not the triggers. But what do all these buttons do exactly? Well, the action button is for jumping, which is helpful for avoiding obstacles or slowing yourself down when you're going too fast. The L and R brake similarly are for tight turns. Use the L brake to turn left and the R brake to turn right. They kind of act like drifts, except for they don't really affect your speed at all. It's mainly just to give you more control over the character. Like I mentioned earlier, I don't use accelerate at all, especially with the character we're going with. However, if you were to use someone like Knuckles, I could see it potentially coming in handy. The strategy I want you to think about as you're controlling the game is to think of Sonic not like a character or a platformer, but rather like a pinball. You can bump into walls and keep momentum. The goal here is just not to slow down, and don't run into water. Sonic really doesn't like water. So there's definitely some good parts in there. The order is all out of whack. I know for sure. We hopped around a little too much. But what I think we can do is we can export the audio, call it Sonic R section 1, V1, hit export. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to open DaVinci Resolve, and we can cut out the sections we don't like. And then on top of that, I'm going to use this sort of AI transcription that will take all of our audio and turn it into like a written transcript, which then I could read off of and make refinements from there and change things I don't like, right? Ayo, who put balls in the timeline? That's not epic. Import media, desktop, Sonic R section 1. This guy right here. Delete all the empty tracks. We also want to keep in mind like length, how long this is running. So we don't want this section to be terribly long. Looks like our final file is about 6 minutes, but we're going to cut it down pretty substantially. AI tools, audio transcription, transcribe. Let that run. This will give a transcript of our entire timeline, which will be helpful. There we go. And then I could just copy and paste this into a Google Doc. So this is what all our rambling contributed to. 3 paragraphs. And are these good? I don't know. We'll see. So let's read over this and see how we like this script. The first question that might come to your mind is, which version are we using? Well, you could use this advice to play on the original Sega Saturn, but I'm assuming most of you don't own that. So I'm using the PC version with a couple of mods. Note that none of these actually change the gameplay. In fact, I strongly advise not doing that. These mods just let the game look better and run in widescreen. The next roadblock is undoubtedly the controls. People get stumped and don't understand how Sonic moves. So here's how I'd map my controls to any controller. For starters, you want the bottom button to be set to action. The leftmost button should be set to accelerate, left bumper to L brake, right bumper to right brake, and then you steer with the sticks. Don't worry about the camera button. All this does is slightly zoom the camera out, and you can set pause to literally whatever you want. I will note, you will be tempted to put accelerate on the sticks themselves. This is not worth it. You go fast enough as is. In fact, we won't even be using the accelerate button for most of this because of the character we chose. Speaking of which, yeah, what character are we going to pick? You get 4 to start out with. Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and Amy. So there we go. That brought us down to under 4 minutes with a bit of a pause. And you can see if we look at our middle monitor, this is how we had recorded it. I went this paragraph first, then this one, and then went the second paragraph for last. The reason why is I think it makes more logical sense to go controls, then character, then strategy, right? Because as it was currently constructed, we kind of go from controls to strategy, and then saving the character for last just doesn't make much sense. I also kind of shortened some of the verbiage and got rid of a lot of filler words. Again, this isn't going to be the final script, even remotely, but it is better than what we currently had, and that's really what we're shooting for. It's just small, minor improvements each and every time. Sonic R Section 1 V2. And hit transcribe. We should get a different transcription. Okay, so this is V2 of the script. We could use this, but I think I'm going to go over it again, see how I feel about it. If I don't end up changing much, then we could use it, but chances are I'm going to find the wording of something to be a little bit cringe and be like, actually, we could make this part better. So the first question that might come to your mind is, which version are we using? Well, you could play the original Sega Saturn, but I'm assuming most of you know. Let's start with the basics. We're going to be using the PC version. This advice could work on the original Sega Saturn, but I'm assuming most of you don't own it for fairly good reason. I should start this video by saying that we're not going to be playing the original Sega Saturn version. Most of the advice that I mentioned in this video is applicable to it, but for accessibility reasons, I'm going to be using the PC version with a couple of mods installed. Links to those in the description down below. Note that none of these mods actually change the gameplay. In fact, I strongly advise not doing that. These mods just let the game look better and run in widescreen, which I think is helpful for a modern audience. The next... Man, I really don't like this first paragraph. That's fine. That's why we're here. Ugh. Now might be a good time to mention that I'm going to be playing the PC version of Sonic R. While all my advice is applicable to the original Sega Saturn version, for accessibility reasons, I'm sticking with the PC, primarily because of the mods. Don't worry, none of these mods actually change the gameplay. In fact, I strongly advise doing that. Not doing that. I strongly advise against that. Might be better. I strongly advise against that. The first thing I should mention is that we're going to be playing the PC version. While all the advice in this video is applicable to the original Sega Saturn, I feel like it's important to mention that we'll be using the PC version for this video. While the advice in this video, we're already over 6 minutes, good lord. Just a heads up, we're going to be using the PC version for this video. While the advice presented could work on any version of Sonic R, I'm assuming... All right, step one, go ahead and acquire a Sega Saturn from eBay and then spend about $200 for a copy of Sonic R. All right, just kidding. We're actually going to be using the PC version of this game with a couple of mods installed. Note that none of these mods actually change the gameplay. In fact, I strongly advise against doing that. These mods just All right, step one, spend $200+ on eBay to get you an original Sega Saturn and a copy of Sonic R. You're also going to want the analog controller, which you can find by... Okay, look, we're not going to be using the original Sega Saturn version. The advice in this video can apply to it, but for this video... All right, step one, go to ebay.com. What you're looking for is a Sega Saturn with a copy of Sonic R. If you can get the analog controller all included for about $500, I would say that's a pretty good... All right, I'm joking with you. We're going to be using the PC version of Sonic R with a couple of mods. Note that none of these mods actually change the gameplay. In fact, I strongly advise not doing that. These mods just let the game look better and run in widescreen, which I feel like is appropriate for modern audiences. And finally, we're done. Jeez, that one felt like pulling teeth. But I feel like we got a much better script out of that one. I'm gonna not change hardly anything. Maybe just like a little couple of words here and there. Again, trying to get rid of as many filler words as possible. But otherwise, I think the flow is pretty good. 3, 2, 1. Step one, go to ebay.com. What you're looking for is an authentic Sega Saturn with a copy of Sonic R. No cracked jewel case. If you can get the analog controller and have that all included for about $500, I would say that's a pretty good... All right, I'm joking with you. We're going to be using the PC version of Sonic R with a couple of mods. Link in the description down below. Note that none of these mods actually change the gameplay. In fact, I strongly advise not doing that. These mods just let the game look better and run in widescreen, which I feel like is appropriate for modern audiences, as well as makes the game more accessible. The next thing we should tackle is controls. People get stumped early on and don't understand how Sonic moves. So here's how I'd map the controls to almost any controller. For starters, you want the bottom button to be set to action. The leftmost button should be set to accelerate, left bumper to L brake, right bumper to right brake, and then you steer with the sticks. Don't worry about the camera button. All this does is slightly zoom the camera out, and you can set it to literally any button you want. The same is true for pause. I will note, you will be tempted to put accelerate on the sticks themselves. This is not worth it. You go fast enough as is. In fact, we won't even be using the acceleration button because of the character we pick. Speaking of which, yeah, what character are we going to pick? You get 4 to start out with: Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and Amy. Let's get Amy out of the way first. I don't think she's very good. In fact, most of the unlockable characters are too slow to use for our first playthrough, so our choice is boiled down to Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles. Knuckles is the slowest of the bunch, but can work. Tails, I would say, is newcomer friendly, but I think the best pick here is Sonic. Yeah, I know, the game's called Sonic R and we're using Sonic, but hear me out on this one. Sonic R employs a rival system similar to other kart racers, so if we pick Sonic, our rival is going to be Knuckles, who, like I mentioned earlier, is really slow. This comes in handy for races where we have to come back from a pretty substantial lead. Sonic is also the fastest of the starting 4 characters. You're never going to have a CPU that's faster than you, at least not until you get to the unlockable characters, which shouldn't be that big of a deal. Now that we have our controller set and our character picked, let's talk a little bit about strategy. Remember those controls we set earlier? Well, here's how we're going to use them. The action button is for jumping. Use this to avoid obstacles or to slow yourself down. The L and R brakes are for tight turns. Use the L brake to turn left and the right brake to turn right. They kind of act like drifts, except for they really don't give you a speed boost at all. Like I mentioned earlier, I don't use Accelerate, especially with Sonic. However, if you were to use a character like Knuckles, I could see it coming in handy. The main thing I want you to keep in mind is that Sonic, or really any of the characters, don't control like platforming mascots. They don't really control like cars either. I think of them more like pinballs. Think about it. If you're a pinball and the track is a course, when you bounce into a wall, you shouldn't lose momentum. You actually just bounce off and keep going. This functions differently than Mario Kart, where if you bump into a wall, you lose all your speed. The only thing that slows you down in Sonic R is yourself. And, well, the water. Sonic really doesn't like water that much. That's section 1 wrapped up. It is 5:50 according to this. But because this is the final section 1 for now, I'm just going to cut it in DaVinci rather than pasting it back to Google Docs. Actually, I'll put it on the Google Doc just for like a written script if I want to change it more from here. And this says 3:23, which is pretty good as far as timing and pacing wise. The water. Sonic really doesn't like water that much. Okay, that's pretty good. Wow. Okay, yeah, I like that a lot, actually. I was looking over our written portion just to make sure we covered all of our key points, and we do. And we added a little bit of information as well. There's a lot more humor injected into this one, and it still keeps the pacing, I feel like, fairly well. So, yeah, that's 3 minutes of the video done. All right, section 2. Actually, I'm going to stop you right there. Hi, Aiden from the future here. Did you know this recording was over 3 hours long? Wow, that's crazy. Here's another fun fact. The rough cut for this video is 45 minutes long. So yeah, we're going to cut out most of section 2 and 3, mostly because the process is the exact same. I start with my notes. I turn those notes into an outline for each section. Then for my first take, I'm simply reading section 1, going from one bullet point to another, mistakes and all. I take that audio, throw it into DaVinci Resolve, use the AI audio transcription to turn it into text, and from there I have a script. The remaining takes are simply me reading that script and changing the verbiage, removing filler words. I'm not exactly reading it one for one, it's just a platform to start from, and I go over it as many times as it takes until I have a voiceover that I'm happy with. Here's why I prefer this method. For one, I find it more fun. As someone who enjoys recording a lot more than writing, this keeps me more involved in the process. For 2, I find that it keeps me from getting robotic and stuffy. When I'm writing, I'm usually in my head trying to sound all professional, and it's just not the tone that I want to carry across. For 3, I find a lot of times that there is usually a translation from writing to recording, because what sounds good on the page might not sound good on video. This process removes that step because I'm always focused on making sure it sounds good for video. That being said, if you enjoy writing the script and then recording it for voiceover, keep doing that. If you like it, that's awesome. In fact, you'll probably save a lot more time than what I tend to do. I just find it to be more enjoyable for me. Anyway, I'm going to show you the final takes for section 2 and 3 and then wrap up the video. Enjoy! Believe it or not, there's not much to do in Sonic R. I know it says there's 4 modes, but really, there's only Grand Prix. Options we've already covered, multiplayer is, well, multiplayer, and time attack doesn't get you anything. It can be helpful to learn the layout of the track, but even then, it doesn't include the coins or emeralds, so I don't think it's useful. That means all we have to tackle is Grand Prix, which can I say is a bit misleading. Grand Prix usually means you do multiple tracks in one run, you know, like the Mushroom Cup. Well, what Grand Prix actually is that it just lets you race one track at a time, so it almost functions more like Time Attack should. What an odd game. Okay, now that we're in Grand Prix mode, I'd say there's 2 major goals we need to accomplish. The first is to get all of the Chaos Emeralds. In Resort Island, there's only 1 you have to find, and it's fairly easy. However, in the other levels, there's 2 apiece. Once you find an emerald, all you have to do is win the race, and you keep it. If you lose, well, you lose the emerald. Keep in mind, you don't have to go for 2 emeralds in one run. If you want to get one first, play the track again, and then get the other one, that's totally doable. Sonic R remembers and saves your progress, so we can take advantage of that. The reward for collecting all the emeralds is, of course, Super Sonic, the most broken character in the entire game. He makes all the other races feel super trivial. The second goal we have to do is to collect a bunch of coins, 5 per track. In Resort Island, after you collect 5 coins, all you have to do is finish 3rd or higher. This puts you in a race with an unlockable character, in our case, Metal Sonic. If you beat him, you get to add him to the roster, but if you lose, you have to do the entire thing over again, including collecting the coins. While you could technically get the emeralds, the coins, and race the character all in one run, I'd say it's a lot easier to break things up into chunks. We're going to be beating Sonic R in 2 runs. For the first one, we're only going to focus on the emeralds. Don't worry about the coins or the characters. Once you unlock Super Sonic, then the second run we can focus on just the coins. The advantage here is that because we're Super Sonic, the rival battles are way easier. Plus, you've already played through the tracks once, so finding the coins is easier because you've done a lot of the memorization already. Once we finish our second run, you'll notice we have 1 track left, Radiant Emerald. The nice thing here is that there are no collectibles on this track. No Chaos Emeralds, no coins, and only 1 unlockable character. We don't even have to race them. All you have to do is get first place and bam, Dr. Robotnik is unlocked. It's also how you get the true ending of Sonic R. Simply unlock Super Sonic, beat Radiant Emerald, and that's it. You get a nice little end screen telling you that you've officially beaten Sonic R. Radiant Emerald is less of a final challenge and more of a celebration. So, if you make it to this point in the game, consider yourself lucky. Still though, we have 1 section left, and that's all about the tracks. Let's get into it. We cover all the information. I went ahead and checked off all the little bits in section 2, and we are at 2 minutes and 58 seconds, so I was right. It is slightly shorter. So about 6 minutes and 21 seconds for the first 2 sections. All right, for the final section of the video, I want to give you track-specific advice. Keep in mind as you're watching, I'll be providing maps as well as locations for the coins and the emeralds. So if you need to pause the video, feel free. Starting first with Resort Island, there's only 1 emerald and it's located behind this 50-ring gate. 4 out of the 5 coins are free to get except for this one, which requires 20 rings. I'd say the toughest coin to find is right here, near all these miniature islands. It's a little bit out of the way, and if you're normally racing, please don't go on this route, but if you have to get the coin, it's right here. Here's a quick shortcut. If you're looking to catch up, go through the woods rather than the loop-to-loop at the end. It saves a lot more time. Moving on to Radical City, there are 2 Chaos Emeralds. The first is on the pinball table. It needs 50 rings in order to get through. The second is behind a 20-ring gate, and you can find it pretty easily on the coast. I've always found this coin in particular tricky. You need to jump off the ledge to reach the pinball table, and that's where you'll find it. Here's a piece of general advice. You see these boost pads? Avoid them, at least until you're done collecting emeralds and coins. They cost rings to use, so odds are if you use this boost pad, you won't have enough for the gates. Next up is Regal Ruin. The first emerald costs 20 rings, and it's actually on the main path. Get 20 rings, and it's all yours. The second emerald is also near the start of the course, but requires 50 rings to get, and it's a little bit more out of the way. Chances are, if you're missing a token, it's the one near the beginning. You have to kind of go through these passageways in order to find it. But hey, now that you know where it is, use it as a shortcut. Here's another random tip for you. Always collect medals. They give you rings and shields. Rings are useful given that there's so many gates to open, and the shields allow you to traverse the course much easier. Just keep in mind that if you jump into the water, the shields disappear. Reactive Factory has 2 emeralds and they both cost 50 rings. The first one is in this watery area. Just wait for a bit for it to fall to the ground in order to collect it. The same is true for the second emerald, although this one is by a submarine. Again, just be sure to slow down. There are 2 coins in this stage that are a complete pain in the ass. The first one is right at the beginning. You turn right here, go all the way to the end, and then turn around. The second is at the end of the track. It requires 20 rings to get in, and when you get the coin, you again have to turn around because there's no real shortcut. Be sure to get these as early as possible. That goes for every coin, by the way. I would make sure to have all of them by lap 2 so that you have time to catch up. Radiant Emerald, as previously mentioned, has no real collectibles. It does have 2 gates. Unlocking these gives you massive shortcuts through the level, and I would say is required to beat these tough CPUs. I'd say the difficulty for these guys goes as follows. Metal Sonic is the hardest, then Metal Knuckles, then Tails Doll, and Egg Robo. The same is true for their rival races as well. Just make sure you use Super Sonic and get first place, and you've beaten the game. Nice. All right, so that's section 3. And with that, gamers, I believe we've officially finished our scripts. Again, not the on-camera stuff. This was the main portion. I want the voiceover to be scripted just because that's where all the info is. And I want to be sure I get all of that right. And here's our little scripts bullet points. And then on Google Docs, we have my actual VO that I could combine together, obviously, for a final script, if need be. Which means our final runtime for the video so far is 9 minutes and 35 seconds. That's perfect. Not only is it under 10 minutes like we wanted, but again, I think there's some stuff that can be cut here for sure, so we can get it even shorter. But if we even if we keep all of it, right? Like, we're talking maybe 20 seconds of on-camera stuff, which will be really easy to do, just to film the transitions, openings, and stuff. I do want like a cool CRT shot and everything, but we'll get to that later. We're gonna call it for this recording. We've been going for 3 hours and 47 minutes. And I mentioned at the start of this that I wanted to do some asset gathering for the edit, but that'll have to be next time. I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.